Good afternoon. My name is Marcos Bertone. I am the California opinion editor for the Sacramento Bee, and I'd like to welcome you to our live debate between Undersheriff Jim Barnes and Assemblyman Jim Cooper, the two candidates running to be the next sheriff of Sacramento County. The man elected by voters in June will lead the largest law enforcement agency in Sacramento County. He will be responsible for a downtown jail that is a driver of crime in the urban core of the capital of California, and it has been the subject of multiple lawsuits alleging mistreatment of prisoners. One of the two men with us today will inherit a department that has had 4 officers killed in the line of duty in only 7 years. The winner of this race will be the most visible law enforcement leader in our region, with all the accolades and the challenges that go with the job. Before we begin our debate, a few housekeeping items. As we have already stated, this debate is live, it's on the record, and given its importance, we are streaming it to our readers on our Sacramento Bee Facebook page, Twitter feed, and YouTube channel. Questions to the candidates will be asked by members of the Sacramento Bee editorial board. I will introduce each board member before they ask their questions, and it's my job as the moderator to be the nag who makes sure that the candidates do not exceed the allotted time to answer a question. So let's begin. Each candidate will have 3 minutes to make an opening statement to readers and viewers, and once those comments are done, we will begin the question and answer period of our program. So let's start. Let's start with Undersheriff Jim Barnes. You will have 3 minutes. I will prompt you, and I ask you to watch the chat on your screen. I will prompt you at 30 seconds and then at 10 seconds. So Undersheriff, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Marcus. I want to say thank you for the invite and the Bee editorial board and everybody who is watching the live stream. I wish we could do this in person so we can have a more intimate conversation, but this platform allows us, and hopefully many more people who couldn't make it normally in person can be part of this conversation. I just want to say thank you again for allowing me to be here. I think it's important that people understand the why. Both Mr. Cooper and myself plan on running for sheriff. I will tell you, as a man of being on the department now for 24 years, I have worked every level of this organization, from the very entry level of officer, climbing through the ranks all the way up to now Undersheriff. And with that, I've also been able to navigate some of the fundamental shifts and changes that our community is expecting us to do so. But it really has to start back from my beginnings. I was born and raised in Modesto. My mom, my brother, and I, were living in a household where my father was not a nice man. He was dealing with his demons when it came to the alcohol. Took his bad days out on us. And it was, my mom saw the future that was not bright for us. So she made the right decision, removed us from that environment, and we struggled for a little bit. Mom was on welfare for a little bit. I got to experience what that was like, and then she got on her feet and essentially put us in that category, in that right way of mentors and coaches in life. And I didn't realize until I got older, as I look back at who was influential in my life. But ultimately was able to go to Sacramento State. I was an athlete there where I played football. And then at the end, when I was done playing, I coached for a year and then tried to decide what I was going to get into. And it really got to the point where I went on a ride along. And when I went on the ride along, it was one of those moments of, it hit me of, this is my calling, is serving our community, being able to help those who can't help themselves and protect those who can't protect themselves. And as I navigated my career, I really look back on that, never forgetting where I came from is my important feature. But I also understand the pitfalls that this job can have an effect on the employees. I worked homicide for 4 years. I saw things I'll never unsee. I've done more death notifications than I care to admit. And watching how families are just ripped apart and torn apart, it takes its toll on someone. So it's really important that I know we focus on the health and wellness of our officers. I'm excited to be here today because of this is something I never thought in my wildest dreams as I came on the organization to be part of. So I appreciate this opportunity. I look forward to it. There's a lot of community support that I have. I think the grassroots organizations that are behind me right now is what's going to get it done in the end. But from me to you, I look forward to answering the questions and answering especially the tough questions. But again, I thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Undersheriff. Barnes. Now we will hear from Assemblyman Jim Cooper, who also had a long career in the Sheriff's Department before he left for the Assembly. Assemblyman, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marcos. Good to see you and hear from you and your board. I thank you. For the viewers listening in, thank you so much. This is important. This is actually a watershed moment for us in Sacramento County. It's a quality of life issue. Lifelong resident. I was born in France. My dad was in the Air Force. We came here to Mayfair 58 years ago, so a long time in Sacramento. I'm running for three things: change, experience, and leadership. And when I talk about that, change is so important. Why? Look at relationships. I've got three of the members of the Board of Supervisors who are endorsing me, and the Sheriff's Department does not have good relationships. I've talked to some of the board members, and the only time they talk to the sheriff is at budget hearings. There's no conversation. The board funds your money. You got to work with them. Homeless, crime, a myriad of issues you work with the board in, and the Sheriff's Department, their top staff, don't have a good relationship with that. Also, $25 million in lawsuits paid out by the Sheriff's Department because of the sheriff and his top management. Think about that, $25 million. They're down approximately 130 deputies and 100 non-sworn. What would that $25 million do to staff deputies and put them on the streets? Think about that. Homelessness, crime. A lot of crime is up right now. It is an issue right now. We've seen by the shootings in downtown Sacramento. How do we fix that? Also, 7 deaths in the jail. Let's talk about experience. 30 years in the Sheriff's Department. I retired as a captain. I commanded every division. 10 years, a third of my career, I spent in narcotics and gangs, worked undercover for 5 years, buying drugs every night and dealing with gang members. So I have a very intimate knowledge of what the issues we're facing right now. 15 years as a mayor and council member. I started the city of Elk Grove as its first mayor, built the police department, so a lot of experience building a city from the ground up. I've been in the legislature as Assemblyman for 8 years now. I chair the Public Employees Retirement System, and I sit on 3 other committees. And I think that experience, I'm known in the Capitol as the cop in the Capitol. I've authored over 30 bills. Think about that, 30 bills dealing with that. So I'm kind of the go-to guy on public safety issues and really leadership. Being the cop in the Capitol, I accept that. So we work together, and because of the work I've done on bills, protecting women, children, and taking care of violent predators, I'm happy to have the endorsement of our district attorney, Emery Schubert. 50,000 police officers statewide, deputy sheriffs, police officers, investigators, 30,000 firefighters statewide, crime survivors, and crime victims united. So when you think about that, those groups that are coming in, it's for a reason. And then also, I'm proud to have been named Legislator of the Year by the California Police Chiefs. I'm proud also by the Crime Victims United as Legislator of the Year and other awards, and also recognized by crime survivors, Crime Victims United as Legislator of the Year. To me, that's important because it shows the track record. I've had the track record of leadership and getting things done. When I talk about relationships, that's so important. I have the mayors.
Thank you, Assemblyman Cooper.
Have endorsed me. That's important. I've worked with those folks over the years, and it's important for me to keep those relationships with that and really get things done. Yeah, law enforcement is one part of it.
Yeah, Assemblyman, we'll get to it. We'll get to it. So we will let's get right into the questions. And to ask our first question to the candidates is Colleen Nelson, Executive Editor of the Sacramento Bee. Colleen?
Thanks, Marcos. I'd like to start with a question about the downtown jail. And by many measures, it's been a disaster in recent years. It's out of compliance with a court-ordered consent decree. Mental health challenges are not properly treated as prescribed by the consent decree. And the last 18 months, we've seen inmates leave the jail only to be accused of committing heinous crimes, such as the inmate accused of sexually assaulting and killing Mary Kate Tibbetts in Land Park. So with all of that in mind, I'll ask my question in 2 parts. What specifically will you do to bring the jail into compliance with the court order? And what will you do to ensure that fewer released inmates commit crimes in the downtown core? On this question, let's start with Assemblyman Cooper. You'll have 3 minutes to answer, and then we'll have Undersheriff Barnes answer. But Assemblyman Cooper, I'll pass the mic to you.
Well, thank you for bringing up Kate Tibbetts. That's an important issue, a tragic case that never should have happened. I'm actually running a bill on Kate Tibbetts. So when folks are released that are transient parolees, they have to have ankle bracelet monitoring. That bill is scheduled to be heard, I believe, in the next 2 weeks in the legislature. So that's in her memory. I'm working with the family. I've talked to the Downtown Partnership. They're fed up with what's gone on. And yeah, folks are bought in when they're arrested from all over Sacramento County through the police departments and CHP and local agencies and the federal government. We've got to ensure they get back to where they came from. And that's giving them free rides. That's not an issue. The Downtown Partnership wants to work with that. So getting them back once they're released, unless they have a ride, ensure they get a ride home so they aren't downtown to plague downtown and deal with that. And it's just being a good neighbor with that. You can't physically move the jail from downtown from its location. It is cost prohibitive, but you can be a good neighbor. On the question of mental health, the reason you have a consent decree is because you're not doing your job. You have failed to do your job. And the sheriff's department has to do a better job with that, with the mental health. And it's simple stuff from the top down. Having been a jail commander before, I was down there in the evening hours talking to my deputies, making sure they complied with my rules and my instructions. It's okay being a leader, but you have to be seen and be involved and be engaged with that. And some of those things are easy fixes. There are other fixes with the mental health because you have so much limited space with that. But part of that is working with your board of supervisors, having good relationship, because to fund that, whether you build a fourth tower or you move it somewhere else, you have to have those relationships. And right now, the sheriff's department has lacked those relationships for 12 years. And that's really what hurt them. Think about the inspector general that could help on some of these things and investigate that. The sheriff got mad at him and locked him out. That's not good. The public wants transparency, bottom line. And the sheriff didn't do that. So, and the public wants it. So it really makes no sense doing that. If you have problems, sit down, talk, and work it out. You know, one thing I've learned in my years as a council member, a mayor, and an assemblyman is people have differing views, but you can always work it out. You don't need to go nuclear. People want dialogue. They want results at the end. And really locking the inspector general out did a disservice to the sheriff's department, the community, and the county of Sacramento. And we've got to change that. And to me, it's just having goodwill and being a nice person. It's just real easy to be, discontent and just throw things around. And you can't do that as a leader. You've got to be more professional.
Thank you. Undersheriff Barnes, same question to you.
Thank you, Colleen. I appreciate it. Those are very hot topics, obviously, with the sheriff's office, with the consent decree. We continue to work with the leadership of our correctional health services to find out better ways that we can provide that medical. But I think there has to be a clear delineation of who provides that service. That is not the sheriff's office. They're not employees of the sheriff's office. That is, of course, when you look at it, it's the part of the contract service that we do for medical and mental health. And you're absolutely right. Is it to where it should be? It is not. But I also look back at Assemblyman Cooper. You know, when AB 109 came and they started offering money to the jail system whenever they started releasing prison inmates to the jail population, I believe this year is roughly $47 million that they're going to give the local county for funding for housing these inmates. These are long-term inmates. You have to remember the county jail was for pre-sentence and sentence up to 1 year. Now we have people sentenced up to 5 years in facilities that weren't equipped to do so. So for Mr. Cooper and the assembly and other legislators to not have that foresight to provide additional funding for building and or improvements, to me is neglectful, but it's now based on the county to have to solve those problems. As far as, Mr. Cooper hasn't taken any position on the homeless until now. He says he's writing this legislation. And again, I look at, you're talking about putting a parolee who's homeless on an ankle monitor. How are you going to charge that when you're homeless? You have to charge these ankle monitors in order for them to work. And so, yes, he's trying to take this initiative now as he's trying to become sheriff. And he identified the inspector general. I was not the one who locked him out. He identified it correctly. It was the sheriff who did. I'm strong in relationships, even currently currently working with the Downtown Partnership on early releases and working with county probation, the public defender's office on how do we identify those times of release? Because we're mandated by law to have someone out by midnight if they are released on that same calendar day. So there are some restrictions that we have to abide by. But for Mr. Cooper to say it's failed leadership, he doesn't understand the relationships that I have with all of them right now. Yeah, he has 3 board of supervisors, as he mentioned in his opening statement. I have one, but I work with all of them, and they know that. And it is about relationships. He is correct there. But when he talks about leadership, when he was a commander at the jail, there's documentation that says, there was increased suicides while he was a commander at the jail. And so when he wants to say he went and talked to the officers, I get it. The conditions are tough inside the jail, but we are working every day with county officials. We're working with state officials. We worked with, obviously, the BSCC in attempts to try and do an expansion project where people really thought it was more of expanding for officers, and it really was not. It was for increased medical care and increased psychiatric care, and that was voted down by the board. So it's important that when we see that we have opportunities to do build outs at 10 cents on the dollar when it comes to the bond, it makes sense to do that. And I'm a huge supporter of that. If we want to relocate the main jail, we're not tied to downtown, but that's not our responsibility. That's where it's at. That's where it's housed. But we will work with every partner to ensure that we increase safety and conditions.
Thank you, Undersheriff. I've left a little bit of time for rebuttals. So, Assemblyman Cooper, would you like? I'll give you 1 minute if you had any rebuttal.
I think the really big thing is he's Undersheriff now, the number 2 person in charge of the department. He's been at command level staff for some of those issues he could have fixed and he hasn't fixed. And it comes down to it. You work for Scott Jones. You run the day-to-day operations of the sheriff's department. You enforce his policies. And look at his relationships with local elected officials. The bottom line, it still comes back to you, what's going on, and it's negligent with those vacancies. It's probably close to 140 deputies that you have. You have that number of vacancies you can't hire. Yeah, retention's tough statewide everywhere, but folks offer signing bonuses. I've been statewide where folks are hiring. You guys have a problem hiring people. You're not hiring people, and they're all going to retire at the end of, actually last month. So when those vacancies, what could those deputies do? And the lawsuits paid out $25 million. What could that have done for the county as far as putting officers on the streets? It comes back to public safety. Number one, first and foremost, people are scared. They're worried about it because the shootings, our businesses are suffering, and the sheriff's department has a piece of that. They've got some culpability.
All right, Undersheriff, 1 minute for you as well, please.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, Mr. Cooper, when you talk about vacancies, we are at 130 vacancies, and you're correct. But by September, we'll be down to 50 vacancies because we've added multiple academies. And it has nothing to do with money and signing bonuses. What it has everything to do with is the availability that every law enforcement agency in the region is fighting for the same candidate pool. With the new law that changed it, officers have to be 21 age or over. That also made us refocus our recruitment efforts. So to say that the $25 million gets more positions, that's not how it equates. We have additional funding to pay for those. It's getting the people inside the organizations and in law enforcement. And we're doing that. We're looking for innovative ways on how we continue to recruit and the retention side of our staff and our personnel. I go back to my opening about health and wellness. It's important we focus on that, where people enjoy coming to work. They enjoy providing that high quality of service. And that's what I'm committed to. And that's where, to me, to know that we're going to be about 50 vacancies in September, we're going to get through it. I'm confident of that.
All right. And believe me, we will have a chance to rebut throughout this. So the next question will be asked by Josh Golke, Deputy Opinion Editor for the Sacramento Bee. Josh?
Thanks, Marcos. Undersheriff Barnes, California gives law enforcement leaders like the sheriff the authority to approve concealed carry permits in the area. And the current sheriff, Scott Jones, has approved thousands of those permits, far more than his predecessors and a lot of other law enforcement leaders around the state. We're wondering whether you think this has added to a dangerous proliferation of firearms in the community, and whether, as sheriff, you would be stricter in approving those permits, and why or why not. And you have 3 minutes on that one.
Thank you for the question, Josh. You are correct. I'm a supporter of the CCW program, but also looking at ways of how we do cost neutral. As you know, that's a big one of the complaints is how much it costs. But the reality is we use retired annuitants, not full-time employees as we do it. And we have a very strict vetting process. And some of the incidents that you're seeing around the region and across the nation are not CCW holders, like what we saw this past weekend. They were not CCW holders. And it has been a lot more difficult, too, because when you look at some of the decriminalization of some of the crimes in Prop 47 and 57, there's some people that where their case maybe originally was a felony has been dropped to a misdemeanor, and they've been able to get their case expunged. And we have people like that who are now applying. So we are very strict on who we're going to allow to carry the CCW and the firearm, because it's an endorsement. But our community wants to feel safe. And what we see in our region right now, they don't feel safe. They're very vocal about it. As I go around and talk and do meet and greets and talk to people, that is one of the biggest concerns right now, is they do not feel safe because they feel crime is on the rise. So I would continue issuing those. To say I would do the amount that the current sheriff has done, I can't say that. But what I will do is we will continue to be responsible in the issuance and endorsements of CCWs, and we will continue to look for better ways that we can try and do it as a cost neutral.
Assemblyman Cooper.
I supported CCW since 2010. I support a good vetting process to make sure our folks are qualified. And really, if you go back and look at the numbers and incidents, it's just not there. The gun holders or the candidates or the permit holders are very responsible gun owners.
Okay, the next question will be from Abed Epley, opinion columnist for the Sacramento Bee.
Thank you so much, Marcos. Current Sheriff Scott Jones has had a frayed relationship with the Sacramento County government, and particularly the Board of Supervisors. Jones even denied access to department buildings, effectively locking out former Inspector General Rick Brazil in 2018. Jones was angry with Brazil for questioning whether deputies needed to fatally shoot a fleeing suspect, and he made recommendations for how to handle such situations in the future. So my first question is for Undersheriff Barnes. Did you agree with how Jones handled that situation? And as sheriff, would you be supportive of the Inspector General or a Citizens Review Committee reviewing fatal shootings? You have 3 minutes.
Thank you for that question, Robin. Personally, I do not agree with it. I like to deal with issues behind closed doors as far as if we're having disagreements. But I don't know what the decision-making factor was for my current sheriff. Obviously, he made that decision, but decisions have ripple effects as well. I will tell you that my relationship with the County Board of Supervisors is very strong. I'm confident in saying that right now. I'm also confident in saying my relationship with the CEO of Public Safety, Eric Jones, is strong. We've been very proactive in conversations. As far as the Citizens Oversight Committee, I think if we get the Inspector General who's retiring in place, and with the relationships that I know I will establish, because I already have them, that there won't be a need for it. But the transparency will be there. We already have the commission that the Board of Supervisors have brought together. And I continue to be forward facing and having those conversations and build it. So as far as continuing with those dialogues and those open conversations and candid conversations, I guarantee will confidently those relationships will remain strong.
Thank you. Assemblyman Cooper, in 3 minutes, did you agree with how Jones handled the situation with Brazil? And as sheriff, would you be in favor of enhanced oversight from the Inspector General or even a Citizens Review panel?
You know, doing things behind closed doors is not transparency. The public wants transparency. Law enforcement wants transparency. That's a really big issue. And with the Inspector General, I support it 100%. And they're trying to make your department better and just a second set of eyes. It's not adversarial, and I would not have locked them out. If you have any issues, sit down and talk with somebody. And what makes it more troubling is you have zero relationship with your Board of Supervisors. That is so important. It's a partnership. At the end of the day, you're the sheriff. You make the final decisions because your name's in the door and you deal with it. But at the same time, you can work with those folks and get things done. And it's just it's frustrating to have things like this where folks don't listen with this. And it's the same thing. Jim is Scott's handpicked successor for a reason. So you can't change things. That's how Scott is. And if you see this rhetoric that Scott's put out over the years, it's frayed all the relationships. It's been scorched earth. It hasn't benefited anyone. Like I said, in the legislature during my time, learn to get along and work across the aisle and work with other individuals. Yeah, they may have a different point of view, but let's get along at the end of the day. And we can agree to disagree, but do it civilly. But locking somebody out, that's throwing a temper tantrum. At the end of the day, who does it really benefit? The Inspector General can do a lot of things, and Rick Brazil was knowledgeable. How can we do things better and make sure our deputies go home safe at the end of the night? Look at large agencies in California. The Sacramento Sheriff's Department has had more officers killed in the line of duty than anybody else, even bigger agencies. Why is that? Because they don't want to go back and look at things and see how we can do things better. That's an issue. It's got to be fixed.
Undersheriff Barnes, 1 minute to rebut.
No, and I appreciate Mr. Cooper's position on that. But again, he's talking about my current sheriff, Scott Jones. I would encourage all of you at some point in time, reach out to the Board of Supervisors, and I encourage you to talk to them about the relationship that I have. And I think that's important. We stay focused currently in this debate is what the difference between me and Mr. Cooper is, not so much as my current boss. Yes, the sheriff has picked me and appointed me to be the undersheriff because I'm a proven commodity. My reputation is unmatched. I lead and I develop leaders, and my ability to strengthen the relationships in the community with community-based organizations and county partners is already established. And that's why I was picked. So when he talks about getting behind closed doors is not transparency. What he's talking about is when I have issues or if I have a disagreement with somebody, I just don't do it out in public.
So,
and if I may, I'm sorry, my apologies. I saw the note that there might have been a time down. I thought my time was up.
you have 5 seconds left.
Oh, that's okay. I'll defer. Thank you.
Well, I wanted to stay on this point because I covered this issue extensively, and Rick Brazil, as the Inspector General, wrote a report after the fatal shooting of Michael McIntyre on the shoulder of Highway 50. He was an African-American man who was having a mental health crisis when he encountered sheriff's deputies. He was accused of hitting one of the deputies in the head with a rock, and he fled. And not only was the videotape not released even long after the court had ordered Sheriff Jones to release the videotape, but what Rick Brazil was advocating for in his report was better practices to de-escalate situations, and the result was he was locked out of the building, and the situation went nowhere. So I'd like to start with Assemblyman Cooper. What would you have done differently in that case, Assemblyman Cooper, as the sheriff, when a third party was questioning whether your officers were correct in fatally shooting someone? What would you have done?
Well, number one, Jim is Scott's handpicked successor. He's the same values and opinions that Scott does. That's the reason Scott put him there. And one thing about Rick Brazil, you may disagree with him, but we can sit down and have a civil conversation. One thing I'll point to, the public, and no officer, when you start your shift, you don't want to go out and ever have to take someone's life or use deadly force. God forbid it ever happening. That's so important in law enforcement. But the issue is you need to train that, and training is so important. Just think about less than lethal force. The public wants to see more of that. And as your sheriff, I'm going to have more of that. They only qualify twice a year on their less than lethal weapons. Twice a year. You want to become proficient at that. You should qualify much more. So what I'm saying is, from a leadership standpoint, why are they qualifying twice a year? Use less lethal when you can. And it's tough. Like I said, and the officer was injured severely, could have been killed by that. So it's tough, and you got to make a split-second decision. But number one, training goes into it. Doing reviews of what happened and what we can do better. There's nothing ever wrong with going back and reviewing your operations and how officers performed with that. So
was that a bad shoot?
I'm not going to say that. I haven't seen the details. All I know is what I've read in the paper. I have not had a chance to review the report. But like I said, I think more less than lethal training can happen, but twice a year is inadequate. Think about that.
And Undersheriff, if you had been in that position and there was the third party who was suggesting that your officers could have taken a different course of action besides killing a suspect, how would you have handled that?
Well, at the beginning, as we talked about, it's a conversation with where do they draw that opinion from, and what fact patterns do they use to get it, and are they using all relevant information? When Assemblyman Cooper talks about less lethal training, we have transitioned. We have changed our 870 Remington shotguns into all less lethal. We no longer carry the shotgun to add an additional less lethal option. We carry tasers. We carry OC. There's many levels. But I will tell you, in a violent encounter, and that's what that was. A rock hit him in the head. He felt, from all I understand, is he felt potentially incapacitated, and the actions were taking place. But I really firmly believe in, and what we've been doing since I've been in place, is how do we going to start looking at this and add it to a development or training so we can do maybe best practices moving forward. We're going to be developing a research and development team that's going to identify just these key issues, best practices across the nation. Internally, as we look at things, is there a better way to be doing things? And we're going to have to move towards that. I have a philosophy: as best as a standard. And we got to look at what are we currently doing and the type of training are we adding to some potential challenges. And so for me, we constantly have to do after action debriefs, looking at these major incidents. How can we do better? But also bring in community leaders to be part of those discussions. And so when they look at this incident, we can get the viewpoint from the community, and what could we be doing to provide a better service. But to me, is once we get the community leaders involved and we start doing these roundtable discussions, we'll be able to get that research and development team in place and provide the better training that I know our officers are wanting, but also at the same time our community, will receive benefits from.
Was it a bad shoot?
No, it was not.
Even though the suspect I can see where he has a rock when he's close to the officer, but he ran away and they shot him at distance.
Well, I don't believe the report said it was a bad shoot, if I'm correct. I don't have it in front of me. Correct.
Right.
So as I look at it, there's obviously takeaways from every major incident. And when you talk about individuals that are experiencing mental illness, we have established additional training. We have clinicians who ride with officers to helpfully compete and combat some of these issues we're seeing in our communities.
All right. And with that, the next question will be from Yusef Beg, Assistant Opinion Editor for the Sacramento Bee. Yusef?
Hi, gentlemen. I want to touch on the issue of bail for a moment. A parolee with a lengthy criminal record was accused of killing Mary Kay Tibbetts in her Land Park home. Sheriff Jones quickly blamed liberal zero bail policies for the release of the suspect from the downtown jail. And a Superior Court official told the Bee that the parolee could have been held for violating parole under a 2017 assault conviction, and that could have led to a higher bail of $50,000. A court spokesman said no one from the sheriff's department notified the court before releasing the suspected killer. Assemblyman, in 3 minutes, do you believe the sheriff's department was at fault in this instance? And if so, what would you do as sheriff to ensure repeat offenders with violent histories are not sent back on the streets?
From what I know on a superficial level, not having been inside, I do believe there was a problem in communicating and finding that out. You've got to hold those people. That's the important thing. A lot of talk about bail and no bail. And one of the things, that jail books in 55,000 people a year. They only hold 2,500 inmates. So most folks go in and go out. The ones that stay typically have multiple failures to appear, are on probation or parole, or have a high bail. So they've got to do a better accounting system to ensure those folks are held and not released on that. That was a very tragic case that never should have happened. And we can't point the fingers at everybody else. It's how do we come together and work? And as your sheriff, I'm going to work with the judges and the Superior Court, pretrial release, and try and get these things resolved to make it safe at the end of the day. I mean, violent crime is up. And we can't have incidents like this happening again. It's tragic, and we've seen far too much death with Ms. Tibbetts and the woman in Rancho Cordova. We've got to change that narrative and really hold people accountable. And the public's looking at it. So there's some good questions to answer.
Undersheriff, this was your department that was scrutinized. Do you believe you guys were at fault? And what would you do as sheriff to ensure that something like this never happens again?
Thank you for the question. I'll tell you what we have done in working with it. And during the current time of the COVID, the pandemic, there was zero bail, and then there was early release. So there was a lot going on during that. Not to be excused, but I want to make sure everybody's educated on this. So when someone is booked into jail on a charge and they're on parole, we will contact the parole office and see if there's a parole hold that will be put on it. It's not us to contact the courts and say, no, they need to stay longer. There's actually steps that have to be taken in order for that parole hold or an increased bail on that. So that was not done. Obviously, the tragedy that happened is brought to light everybody, and it got elected officials, it got leaders on board to say, we have to look at doing something better. So as sheriff, we're already moving towards that. We've worked with the district attorney's office. There was a training video that went out to not only us, but our regional partners on how to kind of triple check if we're looking into someone's criminal history record. And is there a way and a mechanism to, if there is an increased bail possibility, to do that to prevent violent crime. So we've already currently done that. That video is out. Our officers and our staff at the jail has already been educated on that. And just continue to not only work with the judges and everybody, the public defender's office, the DA's office, to make sure that we are more strategic as we move forward with all the releases. But, I kind of go back to, my opponent, Mr. Cooper, who's sitting at the very building in the Capitol that can affect that change and put in safeguards to make sure that that happens. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen. In 8 years, that hasn't happened. And I look at now he wants to come and be sheriff to protect this community. And so when I see and hear that, I just find it interesting that when he's at the state level, at the lawmaking level, that was not done. But now as sheriff, he's going to ensure that that safeguard is in place. But But I would tell you that we're already working on those mechanisms as far as making sure the community stays safe and everybody is, again, alerted and notified. So thank you for that question.
Assemblyman, 1 hour rebut. 1 hour. 1 minute to rebut, please.
Well, that's
1 hour.
interesting.
1 minute.
We had a bill, AB 42, by Rob Bonta, then Senator Ron Bonta, on the bill. I led the floor charge, a bipartisan effort on the floor, and actually killed that bill with my floor speech on AB 42. The Sacramento County Sheriff Department or none of their command staff ever weighed in, never sent a letter of opposition into that. So you saw many law enforcement agencies, police, sheriffs, DAs weigh in on that. The Sacramento Sheriff's Department never weighed in. In my 8 years in the legislature, they have never weighed in on one piece of legislation, landmark legislation, use of force, body cameras, the carotid constriction. They've never opposed or supported anything. And there's paper documentation on that. So I'm not sure what Mr. Barnes is talking about, but you have to weigh in. And what's criminal is these folks were 1 mile away from the Capitol. They never showed up for one hearing to testify in support of their opposition. So that's why we have the Tibbetts Act. They didn't weigh in on that right now. The bill going forward, I've got lots of letters of support for that bill. I have nothing from the Sacramento Sheriff's Department. They've been absent.
Undersheriff, 1 minute to rebut.
No, thank you. I think it's interesting how Mr. Cooper talks about relationships is the big issue. And I'd be interested to see what type of efforts his office did to reach out to our organization for that. But again, when he talks about attacking this bill and the efforts that he's making on the floor, I just find it interesting that he says in 8 years that we have not been at the table. I haven't been in this position in 8 years, but he's obviously talking about my current boss. And I would be interested to see what efforts that were made there for either opposition and or support. But I will tell you right now that I'm continuously working with our county leadership, our county partners, community-based organizations to make sure that not only when we start putting in these efforts to find out, are we going to increase bail? Is it responsible? We're not just going to say it as a tagline and say we're going to do it, but is it the best for the safety of the community and the individual that this is impacting? So we just can't forget about the victims on this and making sure that when we do it, we all sit at the table and come to something that we can all agree upon moving forward and not just throw something out there just so it can be hashtagged or a tagline.
So I want to make sure we go over a point because this really jumped out at me. So after the Mary Kay Tibbetts issue, Sam Stanton, phenomenal reporter for the Bee, reported that the Superior Court officials told the Bee that the parolee in question and the suspect had been held for violating parole and had a 2017 assault conviction used as and had his 2017 assault conviction been used as the underlying charge, there would have been a $50,000 bail. And the court spokesperson said that no one from the sheriff department notified the court before this suspect was released. So I want to be sure I understand you, Undersheriff. What happened in that case?
Well, I don't know the exact steps. I was not involved in that. But what I do know when we talk about those processes in which we do, I can explain that process. So when someone is about to be released, they will put in the court desk will actually enter in, the time credits. Are they due to be released? Is there any outstanding warrants that are coming? And there was nothing either from the court side, the state parole side, probation or like that would show that we needed to keep that individual in custody. And so that's how the individual was released. But to say that it was the soleness of the sheriff's office, I find that to be neglectful because I think there's many roles that played in this. And as we look at it now, everybody's looking for a solution to make sure this doesn't happen again.
Assemblyman?
I'm hearing a lot of, I don't know, I wasn't there. You're part of leadership as a captain, as a chief, as the undersheriff. So you're part of that management, executive management of the sheriff's department. And I don't know doesn't cut it. You're responsible for that. Your leadership, you can affect changes. Like, okay, I want to make changes. I'll make changes when I get there. You've had the year of the sheriff during this whole time. You were his handpicked successor. So I'm sure you could have mentioned some of these things, but it's problematic to say you'll fix that, but I don't know. That to me, that's not sufficient.
Undersheriff?
Well, when he's focused on the I don't know, is I wasn't the one that was part of that investigation to take a look at it. But what I do know is when you talk about the court saying, I don't know if that was an exact say, it was the sheriff's office responsibility. It was a totality of missteps along the way. And When I look at this, it was sad to see it. We have continued laws that continue to be passed that basically compromise the safety of our communities. And as we decriminalize certain things, these types of things happen. But what bothers me is Mr. Cooper sits here on this platform and says it's when it's something that's tragic like that is all of a sudden when the elected officials step up and decide that they want to start making change. And this was predictable. Everything that's gone on over the past 8 years is predictable, that our community is not safer today than it was 8 years ago. So I'll end with that.
Yeah. We will now go. I lost my spot here for a second. I'm sorry. Yes, the next question goes to Hannah Holzer, the Outstanding Opinion Assistant for the Sacramento Bee Editorial Board. Hannah.
Thanks, Marcos. Assemblyman Cooper, this question is for you. Under California Penal Code, it is unlawful for any person to knowingly possess a firearm within any so-called sterile area of an airport, yet you had a firearm in your possession when you were stopped at Sacramento International Airport recently. In 2 minutes, can you tell our audience why you did that and what happened?
As a retired peace officer and a peace officer, I carried a gun before that opportunity. I spent 30 years as a law enforcement officer, 10 years in narcotics and gangs. I had a lot of threats in my life. I've had songs written about killing me, so I do believe in CCWs. I carry that gun. Was traveling out of town for work business and failed to put it in the safe.
And Undersheriff Barnes, I'll switch gears here. You are being strongly supported by the Sacramento County Deputy Sheriff's Association. In fact, they endorsed you before you even officially had an opponent in this race. The DSA in general and former President Kevin Mickelson in particular have used their website to advocate for former President Trump. Should cops be that political? And would you please tell our audience if you agree with that kind of conduct?
No, thank you for that question. If I can answer that in a couple of parts. Number one, we're an apolitical department. We shouldn't be voicing it, especially in a platform, while in the capacity of our uniform and our official capacity, as I say. Now, when you take the uniform off and you now become what you civilian and you're going to voice your opinions on that, that's their constitutional right. But I will tell you this, the misinformation that has been out there, not that you're saying, Mr. Cooper was invited to the Deputy Sheriff's Association, and we were both conducted interviews. Both the Deputy Sheriff's Association and the Law Enforcement Managers Association were there, asked the same questions. We got through the questions, and then it went to the vote for both memberships. 76% voted for me, 24% for my opponent, Mr. Cooper. And then from the Law Enforcement Managers Association, it was 70% for me, 30% for him, which indicates that if there's a fundamental shift or change in law enforcement we need to make going forward, they want me as their leader. But I'd like to address the firearm, if I could just make a quick comment with time. When I saw that news article, I was shocked because I will tell you that we are responsible for carrying that firearm everywhere we go and knowing where that firearm is. To say you were in a hurry, and then when asked about the question, I didn't commit a crime. I'm not going to say anything on record I felt was irresponsible, because you just talked about transparency. And you didn't even mention anything about being inconveniencing the people and the passengers behind you. TSA, the deputies went that, which caused such a great delay for everybody to have to handle this situation. And I felt that's, as a law enforcement leader and as sheriff, as you say, that you would be better with relationships. I think it's important that you're able to provide an example, because part of carrying a firearm responsibly is knowing where it's at all times. And so I hope I answered your questions about the DSA, but I thank you for the time.
I'm sorry. So I should have asked the Undersheriff about the rebuttal. So I'll ask Assemblyman Cooper any rebuttal before we move on.
As far as the DSA endorsement, you've got about 1,200 members, but I go back to I've got 50,000 cops statewide, 30,000 firefighters statewide, the district attorney in Sacramento County, Crime Victims United, crime survivors. So when you get those type of endorsements, they don't give them out very lightly, because of the work I've done, the 8 years fighting for victims in the legislature. And that's really the biggest thing. When you think about that, why are those victims' rights groups supporting me? Why are frontline firefighters and cops statewide supporting me? Because of the work I've done in the Capitol. And that's really what it comes down to. I'm proud of that, and that speaks volumes in my mind. hopefully with your viewers too.
Undersheriff?
No, that's a great comment. And I'll tell you what I've learned in this process, never going through this political process before. I find it interesting when groups will throw an endorsement out behind someone without interviewing both candidates. So I'm thankful that the B editorial board is doing that, as I think that's what's responsible as far as getting to know your candidates, the why they're doing, not what work you've done together and favors you've done together. Because those groups that he's talking about, I have also put in requests to meet with him, and those meeting requests were not accepted, I would say, because I was never invited to the table to talk about it. So it's unfortunate. So I'm glad we have this platform here. And yeah, he should be proud of those endorsements. I'm proud of mine too. I do have endorsements of elected officials, but I'm more proud of the community leaders that have gotten behind me, because they're really doing the work in the trenches and out in the streets. And so when I get those endorsements, those make me they make me feel special, because they know that partnership and the work that I'm committed to doing. So thank you.
Okay, so now the moderator gets to ask a question. We had our second mass shooting in Sacramento in 5 weeks on Sunday. 6 dead, 12 wounded, more than 100 shell casings found by investigators on downtown streets. Just hours ago, the Sacramento Bee reported that this mass shooting was a gang dispute between at least 5 gunmen. What new initiatives will you take as sheriff to seize more of the illegal guns on streets, and what will you do to deal with gang violence? Assemblyman Cooper, we'll start with you. You have 3 minutes.
Number one, I'll be at the Capitol testifying with my local legislators and actually working with them. I actually ran a ghost gun bill in the legislature several years ago and got killed in committee. I ran Prop 20, which was on the ballot 2 years ago, to deal with serious and violent crimes. And one of the things, domestic violence right now is a felony, but it's not considered a violent crime. Hence the reason one of the individuals was released 5 years early from prison, because domestic violence is not deemed a violent crime. I ran that bill. My opponent, nor the sheriff, never supported that bill. The rest of law enforcement did. Our district attorneys throughout Sacramento did. Police, sheriffs, the unions, they did. And I keep going back to that. They never weighed in. As a legislator, it's not my job to ask someone to weigh in on a bill. Folks send letters in. They send letters in support or opposition. They're there. So for those folks never weighing in on Prop 20, it's like, you got to be engaged. You're in the capital city, you're the sheriff of Sacramento County. Take your butt down to the Capitol and testify on some of those issues and be engaged if you really care about it. And it's tragic. Prop 20 should have passed. And you look about some of those things, the serial theft, that was part of Prop 20. Those guys that had guns, those 5 never should have had guns. Probationers and parolees. And part of this, and I've talked about this for 8 years in the legislature, is coming home to roost. It's been a soft on crime issue. It's coming back. Look at the EDD fraud. A lot of that money was used to buy guns and drugs. That's where these guns came from. And I have intimate knowledge in that. I've run the bills. I've testified on the floor against these same issues over the last years. There's enormous amounts of video of me standing up and testifying on this. Now, that's so important. I can still be a sheriff for one Sacramento County, but I can also be down there testifying in the legislature, like Glenn Craig did, like Lou Blandis did. And it hasn't been done since those 2 sheriffs. And that's really the key, being involved, being engaged. But it's a travesty. I worked gangs. I spent 10 years doing that. So, and it's gotten worse. And part of that is because some of the soft on crime laws. That's why I'm called the cop in the Capitol. Bottom line, 30 bills for public safety put forward. So my voting record on public safety issues is good. So we've got to change that and fix that.
Undersheriff, the gangs and the violence question goes to you. 3 minutes, please.
No, thank you. I think what we saw this past weekend, again, it got a lot of elected officials' attention, because we always looked around our region and in Sacramento talking with our partners and allied agencies, is we always said it was going to be a matter of when, not if this type of event happens. And it was a tragedy on many different levels. When you talk now as it unfolds, that there was gang violence, and then someone who should have been in prison longer than they were, and they got out early, and now to have loss of life like this at this level is unacceptable. Mr. Cooper talks about the bill that got killed. It's because of his failed leadership. He talks about relationships, but he's got something that if you're talking about predicting it to they can come to fruition today, and not to get that done. What did he do since then? How did he continue to reintroduce it? Did he continue to build up those relationships at the Capitol? Because as he says, he knew that this was going to become a problem. And getting down and testifying in committee, you're right. If I will be there, and I will tell you how we're working in the community right now. Right now, we're looking at regional gun violence. We're working with all allied agencies, our federal partners. Because of the state level crime, when we have people right now even getting arrested for a gun, going in and getting back out and having a gun the same day is unacceptable. So we're looking at ways right now is how do we partner with our federal partners to see, can we take this arrest or maybe multiple arrests at the federal level? Because that seems to be where the accountability is. For the past 8 years, Mr. Cooper talks about being tough on crime and the cop in the Capitol, but he didn't get anything done. If you look at his record, and I would ask you to look at his vote record, he sat on the sidelines and didn't take a vote on a lot of issues. But now he wants to be sheriff. He's going to be the toughest one at the Capitol, and he's the one who's pushed all these initiatives through, and that's just not simple. That's not there. And I say fact check it. You can look it up, and everywhere what position he has, there's positions on law enforcement bills that he didn't take a position on. That should have been critical as being the cop at the Capitol. So for me, it's continuing to work with our allied agency partners, our federal partners. We're looking at how do we address these issues when these guns are being made at home. These are ghost gun type guns. They're untraceable. So now what do we do? And I think the accountability phase is when we have untraceable firearms, we need to have stiffer sentences, because those are the people that are going to do it for nefarious reasons. The ones who go out and buy it legally over the counter, not the ones doing what happened over the weekend.
Assemblyman, a rebuttal?
Yes. So the biggest thing, if I didn't get anything done and I was ineffective, why did the police chiefs name me legislator of the year? Why did the probation officers name me legislator of the year? Why did crime victims group name me legislator of the year? And not being in that environment, you go and amend bills. So bills may be bad, but you make those bills a little less worse and less impactful on that. So part of that's negotiating and getting amendments on bills. So it's inside baseball stuff, but changing those bills. And that's what it came down to. So for Jim to sit here and say that, and for Anne-Marie Schubert, who's been a stalwart down there for fighting for victims' rights, she endorsed me, not him, for a reason, because I've worked with him hand in hand, firsthand, and have been concerned about victims and talked about victims on the floor. So it's more about them votes. The governor signed my ghost gun bill. It was signed. No other ghost gun bill's gotten through. So it's tough. It's hard. But I've been down there fighting that fight and getting beat up, but I never wavered, because victims matter. Public safety matters to me. I'm not some talking head with that. Like I said, and I go back to those endorsements. Those are endorsements from what I've done, because I've been there. I fought the battles, and I continue to fight the battles by authoring 30 bills. So, it just that's how it is. It speaks for itself.
Undersheriff?
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, his endorsements, as he continues to talk about them, I will say that the members in the office, the district attorney, do not echo what Anne-Marie is doing. And also we have to think of her race and what is happening there. But I respect Anne-Marie worked very well with her over the years and many levels as far as homicide and cold case. But I would say this, and I've heard Jim Cooper say how he works to amend bills and to make it less worse on people. But it seems like everybody else at the Capitol has figured out how to work on bills together as a bipartisan initiative and, or as he said, behind the scenes, but they still go out and cast a vote. And so I just go back to the voting record and you look at really where does he stand? And when it comes time to actually take a stand for the safety of Sacramento County, you look at how many times he's been absent to take those votes or didn't want to take the vote because he made it less worse. You still got to take a position, because that's what the residents of Sacramento County is going to ask of you, especially in times of critical need and chaos.
Okay, so we could have spent this whole hour talking about homelessness. So let's return to Josh Golke, Deputy Opinion Editor, for a question about the crisis in our streets. Josh?
Thanks. Undersheriff Barnes, the Sacramento City Council is about to consider an ordinance ballot measure that could have the effect of requiring more enforcement of anti-camping ordinances. We're wondering how you see the department's role in responding to the homelessness crisis.
That's a great question, and it's a tough challenge that we have in front of us. As you know, it's really, as sheriff, we have to follow the laws that we're governed by, and obviously there's decisions out there, the Boise decision that talks about what we can and can't do with people that are experiencing homelessness. But as far as taking the enforcement side of it, I think we need to take a more holistic, side of approach as we do it. Is we're continuing to bring the peer navigators in, the transitional housing individuals, and for it to be up to the sheriff alone and or law enforcement alone is not the best way to do it. We have to continue to work together on these initiatives. But I will say that our communities are in uproar right now because of the homeless population and the crime that comes with it. Homeowners are upset, business owners are upset. So it's time that we get to the table and continue to work on it and develop strategies and plans and see where law enforcement does fit in that plan. But that is not the sole response, is to go in and enforce. And you move somebody, where do you move them to? To somewhere else where they can start over? I mean, to me, we got to get into the mindset, looking at the state level, the laws that need to help us out to be able to push towards getting people the help they need and getting them off the streets.
Assemblyman Cooper, how do you see the department's role in this crisis in light of the possibility of more measures against public camping?
It's about accountability and compassion. See, I'll start again. It's about accountability and compassion. And that's so important to do that. And housing is a big part of it, but mental illness and substance abuse you have to deal with. There's not been a concerted effort. They talk about wraparound services, but it's thin on the mental health aspect. It's also thin on the substance abuse issue. Look at the American River Parkway, a jewel. Folks are scared to go down there. Most of that territory is in the county. The sheriff's department doesn't do a lot down there. They should, and try and get those folks accountable and move them along. 100 fires down that parkway in the past 2 years. The resources we're dealing with. The sheriff's department reduced their hot team person, the members of the board of supervisors out there, so their homeless outreach team has been reduced. That's an issue. But for the sheriff to go on the parkway and start somewhere, because the public should enjoy that parkway and find places for these folks to go. I'll tell you one thing, I've talked about conservatorship since day one, since I've been there. The governor just mentioned conservatorship, and it's a start. We need to go a lot further, but for some folks in their minds, it's okay someone walking around nude, eating out of a garbage can. That's not compassionate. That person is better off being taken care of somewhere, and we've got to do that. Conservatorship has to be an issue, but no one wants to talk about it. It's gotten bad. We spent $15 million on homelessness, and it's gotten worse. We've got to change it. It's the number one issue in the public. Number one by far to deal with it. It has to start somewhere. And the amount of resources that are drained in law enforcement dealing with homeless issues. Sac PD, the Sac Sheriff Department, drive along Fair Oaks and Howe, it is insane. But start somewhere on the parkway because it's been burned up. The sheriff can do that. As your sheriff, I'll do that. I'll commit now to putting my folks out there and getting those folks some housing somewhere else. It's not compassionate, but it's about accountability too.
Okay, so we are at time. It has been a fascinating hour. We hope this event helps clarify the issues for our audience and that it helps them decide which candidate they will choose for sheriff. The state of California will mail ballots to voters on May 9th. The Sacramento Bee editorial board will publish all of its endorsement editorials by May 9th so that voters will have them in hand when they fill out their ballots. Election day is June 7th. Please follow our election coverage on sacbee.com, on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you to the candidates for their time. Thank you to our brilliant editorial board members for their commitment to independent journalism. And thanks to you, our viewers and our readers, for reading the Sacramento Bee. So now on behalf of all of us at the Sacramento Bee, this is Marcos Bertone, California opinion editor of the Sacramento Bee, wishing you a great rest of your day.